Hello, I'm Michael Richardson. The previous video in this series provided guidance on facilitating a workshop to establish the defect ranking score for a batch of defects. In this video, we work with the Excel spreadsheet to demonstrate the selection and result of choosing various options. Let's get started by setting classification and seeing how it affects defect ranking score. We'll set classification to the three values that are available to us: internal, reported, and critical. You'll see that there's no defect ranking score yet. You need to enter understanding and at least one of the other need to resolve variables before that can happen. However, I did reveal the table that provides for the numeric value pairing for each of the text-based option sets available. You can see the bias numbers that are being used to indicate the class. So based on class alone, you can see how the defect ranking score is going to be set into different tiers of score ranges. As mentioned in the earlier video, we always start with understanding. So let's just set understanding now. As we discussed in our previous videos, we start using the defect ranking score process by setting the understanding whenever possible. So for our example, we'll choose a fair level of understanding. You can see the message in the defect ranking score column that we still need to provide at least one need to resolve parameter. So let's choose reach and set reach to be moderate for each of the sample defects that we're taking a look at. Now you can see the defect ranking scores, and as we expected, all things being equal, we would expect to have higher scores for critical defects and mid-range scores for reported defects, and finally internal defects that are not known to the general user or would impact compliance or regulatory workflow would be at the lower end of the defect ranking score. All right, so let's copy what we did here, and we'll just use these as samples again. And we'll make some other adjustments. For example, let's get started and say we're going to do the impact. Okay? And we'll choose a mid-range again. Now this is an example showing that when you use the defect ranking score, when you use the classification-aware defect ranking model, you want to make sure that when you're working with defects, you work with them in a batch where each of the elements in the batch have the same parameters set, because if I were to consider the top three in one batch and the ones in the next three in a second batch, and you can, if I were to start compare, you can see where defects 6 and 2 have the same reach and the same understanding, but because I've started to do another one of the parameters, the defect ranking score where I have two parameters set is going to be higher than one. Now, to make this right, what we really want to be able to do is make sure that when we do a batch of defects, we have all of the defects set to have the same number of parameters fully filled out for each of the impact scores that we're going to be considering. Okay, so let's make another copy of our defects that we're working on. And what we'll do this time is we'll experiment with confidence, just to show you how confidence can affect it. Remember that confidence defaults to high. So really you only need to set this if you're going to be choosing a value other than high, right? And you can see that a lower level of confidence will reduce the defect ranking score. The idea is that things that we're confident in, reach and impact, we should use those values first in terms of sequencing the way that we want to approach the resolution of our defects. Just to show that we do default to high, we can set this to high and we can see the score is 12. So that would be the same as not entering a value at all. It would stay the same. So if you want to use confident, you only need to set the value if you want to change it to medium or low. Now, let's take a look at how pressure affects the defect ranking score. We'll make another copy still of the defects that we were working on to take a look at that effect. In order to take a closer look at that, let's just set them all to internal so that we're working with the same class of defect and we can see how the pressure affects that. Let's also make sure that we have the same values for all of the impact parameter. And you can see now they all have the same defect ranking score. And we're going to start separating that because we're going to start adding pressure now. Okay, so we'll do relaxed and not at risk. And you can see the score goes up. So relaxed, not at risk is different than having no pressure at all. Okay, it implies that there is a due date versus there is not a due date. So if there is a due date, it's going to increase the defect ranking score a little bit. And then you can see the score is going to continue to go up. We can be on track. We can be on track, to resolve as needed, which is good. We're on track, but we're not totally in a relaxed state. We're keeping track of this one, and we're trying to make sure that it's done in time, versus the due date is getting near, and we're not on track to resolve it. So it's going to bump it up a little bit in the defect ranking score. Perhaps they haven't started working on it yet, but that due date is approaching. So we want to push it a little closer to the top of the list. I want to make a note about the pressure setting. Setting the pressure assumes there is a due date, right? And due dates should be used for compliance or contractual or customer commitments. They should not be used to indicate pressure from an internal manager or because a roadmap or plan indicates a delivery date. Now, let's see how understanding will affect the defect ranking score. So to do that, I'm going to just remove the pressure variables that we set, and we can see that they all have the same score again. So what we can see here is if we change our fair understanding to well understood, right, the score goes way up. This really pushes the things that we know how to resolve well, the things that we can get in and fix and release, moves those way up in the defect ranking score. However, those things that we don't understand, the things that are very low in understanding, they're going to tend to get a lower score because we want to avoid blocking our flow. We don't want to jam up our pipeline of resolution by having people spinning and spending time on defects that they don't understand. Now, of course, the classification would change this. If this was critical, you can see that it's still going to be moved up because even though we have no understanding, we're still going to need to be able to have it scored in a manner that pushes it toward the top of our prioritized list.